A scroll survived a fire nearly 1,500 years ago. No one could read it, and the reason had nothing to do with a forgotten language. The scroll was carbonized. Any attempt to open it by hand would turn it to ash. Nobody knew what it said. It could have been a record of trade, a private letter, a work of philosophy nobody had read in a millennium and a half, or something else entirely. This is a story about a small, blackened lump of parchment that sat in a museum archive for decades, and about the strange question archaeologists eventually had to answer. How do you read a document you are never allowed to open?
It begins at En-Gedi, an ancient oasis on the western shore of the Dead Sea.
A place where the desert meets fresh spring water, and a Jewish community once thrived for 4 centuries. In 1965, farmers from a nearby kibbutz were laying a water pipeline near En-Gedi, when their equipment struck something hard beneath the sand.
It was a mosaic floor.
Full excavations, led by archaeologists Dan Barag and Sefi Porath, began in the early 1970s and uncovered an ancient synagogue that had been buried for well over 1,000 years. The mosaic itself was elaborate, an 8-pointed star surrounded by peacocks, cranes, and grapevines. Beneath the floor, excavators found a hoard of thousands of coins, likely the community's charity fund.
Built into the wall facing Jerusalem was a small Holy Ark. The cabinet meant to house the community's most important scrolls.
The strangest find, though, wasn't gold or mosaic. It was an inscription running across the floor in Hebrew and Aramaic. It opened with genealogies and calendar names, the kind of thing any worshipper there would have recognized. Then, without warning, it turned into something stranger. A curse on anyone who revealed the secret of the town. No inscription explains what that secret was. Most scholars connect it to En-Gedi's real source of wealth, balsam, a rare, fragrant resin harvested from trees.
That grew almost nowhere else in the ancient world.
It was worth more than its weight in silver, and was used across the Roman Empire in perfume and medicine. Guarding the cultivation process may well have justified carving a curse into stone. The synagogue burned sometime in the early 6th century CE. One source narrows the range further, to 602 through 610 CE. Though most scholars place the destruction more broadly within the 6th century, likely under Byzantine persecution during or after the reign of Justinian. The upper floor collapsed onto the lower one, sealing the ruins and, unintentionally, preserving the mosaic almost intact. For archaeologists to uncover 13 centuries later. Inside the Holy Ark, amid the wreckage, excavators found a small bronze menorah, and, beside it, a blackened cylindrical lump about the size of a fist. It was the remains of a scroll that had once sat exactly where a community's most sacred text belonged. For 45 years, no one knew what was inside it. It might have been a blank ledger, damaged past recovery. It might have been a text that would change how scholars understand the transmission of Scripture. No one tried to find out, because a single careless attempt to unroll it could turn 15 centuries of history into dust in seconds. Carbonized parchment does not tear when handled roughly. It crumbles. By the time this scroll was found, the world already understood the stakes of a discovery like this. 2 decades earlier, shepherds near Qumran, on the opposite shore of the Dead Sea, had found what became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The En-Gedi scroll was different in one key way.
The Qumran scrolls had been deliberately hidden, wrapped in cloth and sealed in jars for safekeeping. The En-Gedi scroll had burned. Its survival was accidental, the product of the very fire that should have destroyed it. If it could be read, scholars would gain rare physical evidence to test something no one could otherwise check. Global safety lock. How faithfully could an ancient community's most important document survive 1,000 years of hand copying? With no printing press and no master copy to check it against? The obstacle was absolute. There was no known way to open a lump of carbonized parchment without destroying it. For 4 decades, conservators could only keep it safe and wait for a technology that did not yet exist. Whatever was written inside, it stayed exactly that, unread. The person who eventually solved the problem was not a biblical scholar or an archaeologist. He was a computer scientist, Brent Seals, a professor at the University of Kentucky, who spent more than 20 years pursuing a question.
The conservation world had largely written off.
Earlier physical methods had all failed. Conservators tried softening the parchment with controlled humidity, hoping to make it pliable enough to peel apart. Others separated layers by hand under a microscope, working fraction of a millimeter by fraction of a millimeter. Each attempt caused more damage than it revealed, because carbonized parchment loses the elasticity that makes unrolling possible.
It doesn't bend under pressure. It shatters.
Seals to a different approach. Leave the object untouched entirely. His team used X-ray computed tomography, the same category of scanner used in hospitals,
to image the En-Gedi scroll layer by layer.
The result was a 3-dimensional digital model, precise enough to capture the geometry of every wrap of parchment,
Rolled tightly around itself for 15 centuries.
From that model, custom software traced the surface of the scroll through its spiral structure, segmented each layer, and mathematically flattened them, recreating inside a computer the act of opening a scroll that could never physically be opened. The team called this process virtual unwrapping. Machine learning entered only at the final stage, used to distinguish ink from bare parchment. By detecting tiny, otherwise invisible differences in material density. This took the better part of 2 decades to build, refined through smaller, lesser-known attempts on other damaged manuscripts before En-Gedi was ever scanned. Each failed attempt taught the team something about how carbonized material cracked and deformed, and each lesson fed into the next version of the software. Because a discovery like this would face intense scrutiny, the process was built for verification from the start. The full CT dataset was released publicly, so any researcher could download it and check the results independently.
The pipeline was designed to be traceable. If a letter looked contested,
A scholar could walk backward through every pixel of the final image to the raw scan it came from.
Before publication, the reconstructed text was reviewed independently by outside scholars,
and the study appeared in a peer-reviewed journal. Is why the result is regarded today
as one of the more credible achievements in digital archaeology.
The software had done its work. The text was flattened. The ink was separated from the parchment.
And for the first time in 1,500 years,
The words were sitting there, legible, on a screen.
Nobody outside the small team assembled to check it yet knew what they said.
In September 2016, after months of internal checking, the team went public with what the scroll actually said.
it was the Book of Leviticus, part of the Torah. 35 lines emerged from the reconstruction, written in Hebrew without vowel markings. A detail placing the writing before the 9th century CE, when the symbols for Hebrew vowels were introduced. It became the oldest Torah scroll ever found preserved inside a synagogue's Holy Ark, and one of the oldest Hebrew Bible texts in existence, surpassed in age only by the Dead Sea Scrolls found decades earlier nearby.
The detail that mattered most came next.
When scholars compared the reconstructed En-Gedi text to the Masoretic text, the standardized Hebrew Bible still used today, the two versions were nearly identical, letter for letter, despite 1,000 years of hand copying separating them. A 1,000 years of scribes working by candlelight, with no printing press and no way to cross-check against a master copy. And almost nothing had drifted.
It stands as some of the strongest physical evidence scholars have
for how faithfully an ancient text could survive purely human transmission. Not a claim anyone made about the text. A conclusion the burned scroll itself demonstrated, once it was finally able to speak. En-Gedi turned out to be the opening chapter of something larger. The same technique would soon be aimed at a prize on an entirely different scale, in a story that begins with people who had no idea what they were destroying. In the mid-18th century,
workers digging a well near the Italian town of Herculaneum broke into the ruins of a Roman villa, buried under volcanic ash since the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. The estate is thought to have belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus,
Julius Caesar's father-in-law, though this attribution is not certain.
As tunnels pushed deeper into the ash, workers pulled more than 1,800 cylindrical objects from what had clearly once been a library. At first, no one recognized them. They looked like charred logs, and some were discarded or reportedly burned for fuel. By workers unaware they were destroying the only complete library to survive from the ancient world. It was only when one of these objects was accidentally dropped and cracked open, revealing faint columns of Greek writing inside, that the truth became clear. These were books, and they were technically still readable if anyone could find a way to open them without destroying them. Nearly 3 centuries of attempts followed, many of them destructive. An early museum director sliced scrolls lengthwise to expose the writing beneath the carbonized crust, ruining as much as he revealed. In 1753, a priest named Antonio Piaggio built a mechanical device that used silk threads to coax layers apart, a fraction of a millimeter at a time. Patient work that took months per scroll and still shattered many of them. Centuries of forced openings damaged but partially preserved a few hundred scrolls, revealing that the library belonged largely to the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus of Gadara, his own writings and works he had collected on subjects including anger, piety, and the nature of the gods. It is, and remains, the only library to survive intact from the classical world. Every other ancient library, from Alexandria onward, was lost to fire, war, or neglect. This one survived because of exactly how it burned. More than 800 scrolls remained sealed, rolled, and unreadable by any method that didn't risk destroying them. Reading them was harder than En-Gedi had been. The ink at En-Gedi contained metal, which showed up clearly on a CT scan. The ink at Herculaneum was carbon and water, chemically almost indistinguishable from the carbon papyrus it sat on. Scanning was no longer the hard part. Finding the ink inside the scan was. In 2023, SEAL's team opened the problem to the world. The Vesuvius Challenge invited anyone, regardless of credentials, to train a model on the scan data and find even a single letter inside a sealed scroll. The prize started at $200,000
and grew past 1 million as more than 30 donors contributed.
For months, nothing worked.
Then, later that year, Luke Ferreter, a 21-year-old computer science student from Nebraska,
spending his summer as a SpaceX intern,
built a model that separated the faint signature of carbon ink from the carbon papyrus around it for the first time. The first word he recovered was the Greek word for purple.
It earned him $40,000 and proof that the problem had a solution. Months later, Ferreter teamed up with Youssef Nader, an Egyptian graduate researcher based in Berlin,
and Julian Schilliger, a Swiss robotics student.
Who had already won smaller prizes for improving the project's software. Together they claimed the $1 million grand prize, recovering 15 columns of continuous ancient Greek philosophy from a scroll sealed since, before Herculaneum was buried alongside Pompeii. The work has continued since. On June 25, 2026, the Vesuvius Challenge announced that a scroll known as P. Herc, 1667, had been virtually unwrapped and read from its first line to its last. The first time an entire sealed Herculaneum scroll had been recovered in full, rather than in fragments.
The reconstruction revealed nearly 5 feet of continuous text across 20 columns. A 2nd century BCE Stoic treatise on ethics.
In the same announcement, researchers confirmed the original 2023 grand prize reading independently,
using higher resolution imaging that made the ink directly visible in the 3D scan data,
and identified the title of a 3rd scroll as Philodemus's On Gods, Book 8. The project has now moved into its next phase, not reading one scroll, but attempting all roughly 800 that remain sealed.
If it succeeds, it will be the largest recovery of lost ancient text in the history of archaeology. Less than 10 years ago, the blackened lump found at En-Gedi was considered a permanent loss. A piece of history that had burned and would stay silent.
It has since become the starting point for one of the most ambitious recovery efforts ever attempted on the ancient world's lost writing. And that effort is still active today. This was never a story about a single scroll or a single eruption.
Museum storage rooms around the world still hold hundreds of carbonized fragments, catalogued, protected,
and, until recently, accepted as permanently unreadable.
That assumption held for centuries, through 2 world wars, and decades of imaging technology that could photograph a scroll in detail, without ever revealing what it said. It stopped holding in a lab in Kentucky. Applied first to a single burned scroll from a desert synagogue, and soon after, to an entire buried library on the other side of the world. What changed was not the past. It was our ability to finally listen to it.